Hey there, friends. This is Chaplain Kenny. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Deathbed Living with Chaplain Kenny. Taking a little ride today. I wanted to touch on something that I mentioned last night when I was making the video for an accountability check for those of us who struggle with addiction, and actually really it applies to anybody who's just striving to take up their cross and follow Jesus. All of us need that accountability check. And do you know what I mean by that? You just need folks who aren't afraid to ask you, in a loving, positive way, of course, if you're doing all right. You know, are you I keep looking at the wrong place on this lens, but you know, as a person who struggles with addiction, if you're in a place of possible compromise, then you need to let some brothers and sisters know what's going on, folks who know what you've been through, so they can talk you through it and pray for you. And anyway, accountability check is a good thing. But what I was talking about last night, I touched on what helped me after my detox. You know, because lots of folks will go to AA and NA, and those are great organizations, man. I think it started as a ministry, I believe it was founded by a Christian person. So I guess Christians have been struggling with addiction issues just like everybody else for a while now. You know, when you become a believer, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean all your problems are all over, my friends. Let me tell you something, man. The rain falls on the good and the bad. You know, we all have our issues. Been through so many myself. You know, most of these issues in my life seem to be brought on by my own stupid decisions. Not doing what I should do and doing what I shouldn't do, things like that. And I'm not talking about naughty things. I'm just saying that, yeah, I need help. You know, I'm a needy person. People ask, is that Jesus a crutch? Well, he's much more than that, man. He's more like a life support system, you know. I'm a needy man, let me tell you. And I don't have any problem admitting it, you know. Some folks that you think they have it all together, they don't, man. Trust me, they don't. They got issues just like you and I. And although you folks who are struggling with different addictions and stuff, your issues are more obvious to those on the outside. Sometimes some of you are able to hide it really well. So I did go to the AA meetings and the NA meetings after I got out of detox, and it's always helpful to be in a place where there's others who can relate to your struggle. You know, so those are definitely, it's a good idea. But what I found mostly effective for me, though, being a believer, you know, because I gotta confess to you folks, the times that I've messed up, the times that I've had to go to detox and rehab and stuff, is during the time that I've been a believer. All right? We have struggles just like everybody else. You know, the church is just a place, it's a hospital for sinners, you know? And I qualify, I'll tell you that right now. So what helped me most is when I went to a meeting, I mentioned this in the video, but he was a Baptist minister, mid-70s, early 80s. I forget what that dear old fella's name was, but that guy loved Jesus. And he'd been following Jesus for so many years. I mean, like 60 years or something, you know. I could learn so much from that guy. It was a wonderful, wonderful ministry that he had, and it was for folks who struggle with addiction. Funny enough, though, this fella had never drank, never smoked, nothing. He had, you know, a life that wasn't riddled with addictive type of issues. But I got news for you. Even that awesome old dude that I just love and I'm so thankful for, he had issues too, you know. Just because it's not drinking or shooting up or whatever, it doesn't mean that you don't have your own deep issues. You know, some of the deep sin issues that I struggle with and you struggle with, and everybody does to a certain extent, is pride, selfishness, You know what I mean? Lust, things like that. Everybody does to a certain extent. So that old feller, man, he really loved Jesus, and I learned a lot from that guy. But you know, the way that he held the meetings for the group it was wonderful, man. There were some ladies from the church who volunteered to cook for our meetings. It was a once a week meeting, and they would bring us a dinner meal, have it all ready there for us, so when our meetings started, we would break bread and fellowship together. It was wonderful, and we could all just kind of small talk, you know, about what's been going on, you know, wait to get into the heavy stuff until after the meal. But those meals were wonderful, and the lessons were not from the big, I think they call it the big book or the blue book or something like that. No, it's not the blue book, it's the big book. But the lessons were not from the big book. He didn't use AA material at all, or methods really, although accountability is going to be a method no matter what you're doing. If you're dealing with addictive behaviors, accountability is huge. But anyway, he used the gospel as his curriculum, I guess you would say. And the Gospel of John was the perfect curriculum, and continues to be to this day. You know what, man? It could happen just as easily today. This afternoon, I could relapse. You know, I don't see it coming, and I don't feel any kind of temptation, really, to drink. But it could happen to anybody, you know. And as I mentioned before, our enemy prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he might devour. And he's ready to clean your clock if you're ready to leave it open for him. So don't compromise. Don't put yourself in a place where you might be tempted. You know, guard yourself from that kind of stuff. You don't need to go see the bands and the bars and stuff if you struggle with drinking. Or if you associate that with whatever your drug of choice is, you know. There are so many different reminders. Triggers, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Things, you know, that you associate with when you're used and abused. The drug of your choice, whatever. But what I want to tell you, though, folks, is what worked best for me, and it's only because I've been following Jesus since 1988. He captured my heart, and it's never changed. You know, the fact that I struggled with alcohol through these things in my life, things that have happened and stuff, and I turned to alcohol was a huge mistake on my part. But you know, I learned my lesson, I tell you. But I'm not stupid enough to think that I could never relapse again. And you need to think that way as well if you struggle with addiction. Just because everything is hunky-dory right now, just because you haven't craved the drug for a long time, it does not mean that you won't be found in a weak moment where you're really vulnerable. You know, before all the UFC stuff came out, I was really into Mike Tyson, boxing, you know. We didn't have any UFC, you know, until the Gracies and all that kind of stuff came out. Anyway, I used to love watching, especially young Mike Tyson. He wasn't really that big of a fella. He talked kind of funny. I mean, if you heard his audio, no offense, Mike, I don't ever want to offend you, my friend. But anyway, I'm just saying that, you know, because he had a lisp, people would make fun of the man and stuff. But I tell you what, you watch people in the ring with him, and Mike Tyson in the prime of his career, man, he was like a roaring lion. He was looking for you to leave the slightest opening, and that guy would chop you down, man. He was so strong and so fast. He seemed unbeatable, man. He was just vicious. But he couldn't hold a candle up to the enemy that is seeking to devour you. That enemy that has got your number, and he always has. You got to realize that, and you got to know that he's a worthy adversary. There was a Baptist church there where we would meet for these meetings. And this whole feller, he had never struggled with addiction before. But you know what? Although I will say that it does help. If you're talking to folks, it does help if they've been through what you've been through. But man, he was all about focusing on the replacement to the problem rather than the problem itself. For instance, I worked in several banks Federal Reserve, Centaur Bank, Mercantile Bank, Magna Bank, First Granite City National Bank. I worked for a lot of different banks in my career, especially my young career. And when we would learn about counterfeit, do you know that they didn't bring a bunch of counterfeits in for us to look at, talk about currency. Instead, we studied the genuine article. And when you get to know the genuine article so much, there are things that you look for to know that it's legit. It's not some kind of an imposter, you know? You get where I'm going with this? So with the money, you look at the real deal. That's kind of what he did, man. He, instead of focusing on the alcohol and all the different triggers and things like that, he focused on being a real disciple and follower of Jesus. Because if you're striving to do that, then all this other stuff is going to fall into place. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm just saying that if you're seeking first and foremost to worship and serve the Lord, then naturally you're not going to want to be imprisoned by some addiction, right? So there's lots of folks out there struggling who just don't feel comfortable talking to other people in the church about it. You know, it's such a hush-hush thing in the church. But trust me, it's going on, you know, because we're just regular sinners like the rest of them. So friends, I want to offer right now to you, if you don't have anybody in your life that you can share these struggles with, please send me a message. You know, get on Facebook, go to our Facebook page and send me a messenger message or an email. I'm Chaplain Kenny, DDM, like David Mike, at gmail.com. That's my email address. Please, if I could be of any help to you, it would be an honor to me. Just to do the Lord's work is such a pleasure and an honor, and something I don't deserve at all, man. But the Lord delights in using the underdog to do His work, and I got an underdog shirt. Any of y'all grew up in the 70s? Underdog was one of my favorite shows back then. But back to point, the Lord delights in using the underdog. That way He gets the glory. All right, you can tell that I'm obviously not not as sharp as a lot of these guys you see on TV and stuff, but I promise you this, my heart, I just want to please God so much in my life. I know I suck. I know that I got a lot of work to do. It's only been 30 years though. Give me a break. No, you would think that I'd come a lot further in 30 years, but you know, it's strange though, as you're pursuing the Lord, the longer you pursue Him, the more years that go by, you really are getting closer. You're knowing Him better. You're doing the stuff, all the disciplines in your life that you need to do. You're staying in the Word and everything. But even with all that, it seems like instead of getting closer, you seem to be getting further away. And you know why? It's because you're more sensitive. Sorry about the camera angle. You know why? It's because you're more sensitive to all the sin in your life. You know, the little things that you never paid attention to before, you can see them clearly now with more of a godly perspective. The older you get, the longer you follow Jesus. So, did you get that? So what I want to do right now, my friends, is I'd like to extend an invitation to you, just to, maybe be your accountability partner, and maybe be that person in your life that you can be honest with, that you can talk about your struggles. Trust me, man, I've been through lots of them myself. And being in prison ministry for 6 years, I've heard some of the wildest stories you can imagine. I thought my testimony was crazy. Woo! I've heard some crazy things, but let me tell you, man, they're followed by crazy testimonies of God's goodness and His miraculous powers of deliverance. And man, I'm telling you, it's if you haven't become a believer yet, please do. It's the only way to live your life. And when you do get to heaven, you get to Judgment Day, you want to be able to look at him and smile real big and just scream out in joy and run and jump in his arms. That's the kind of reunion you want, or the kind of meeting or introduction, or however you want to look at it, whatever you want to call it. That's what you want your day of judgment to be like. You want to look at Jesus, run into his arms and say, thank you, Lord. It's only because of him. It's because of his grip on us. Because, man, we fail constantly. And the standards of God, of holiness, are absolutely without blemish. The holiness that God's standards are way higher than, you might be looking at your Christian neighbors and seeing them go to church all the time and thinking they're the standard of holiness. They're sinners just like you.